I came home from burying my grandmother to find my clothes on the lawn and his mistress in my robe. None of them knew the divorce papers weren't the only thing waiting on that porch. My silk robe has a small embroidered crane on the left cuff. I bought it in Kyoto on our honeymoon. Thomas had picked it up in the shop, held it to the light, and said it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He bought it for me without checking the price. That was 15 years ago, when I still believed that a man who notices beautiful things must, somewhere underneath, be beautiful himself. She was wearing it when I pulled up. Brooke, standing on my porch in my Kyoto robe, one hip against the railing, watching me get out of the Uber with the particular confidence of a woman who has been told she has already won. Thomas stood beside her with his arm around her waist. He was wearing the charcoal Henley I'd given him for his birthday. He looked relaxed. He looked like a man who had spent 3 weeks making decisions and was pleased with the results. My books were face down in the grass. My grandmother's clock, the mahogany mantel clock she'd kept on her dresser for 50 years, the one I'd wrapped in a sweater for the drive home, was lying on its side near the hydrangea bed. The face was cracked. I had been in the car for 4 hours. I had not eaten. I had not slept more than 3 hours in any single night for 3 weeks. I had held my grandmother's hand while she died at 6:14 on a Tuesday morning, watched them take her body, signed 11 documents, spoken at her service, packed her house, and driven 4 hours home. And Thomas was standing on my porch in the late afternoon light with another woman in my robe, looking at his watch. "Your timing," he said, "is inconvenient as usual." Eleanor materialized behind them both, which is the only word for how Thomas's mother moves. She materializes, like a weather system. She had her hands clasped in front of her and her lips barely parted. "A woman who abandons her husband for 3 weeks," she said, "has no right to call herself a wife." The neighbors. I could feel them behind curtains. I have always been able to feel that. Thomas looked at his watch again. "You have 30 minutes before I call the police." My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I knew who it was. I bent down and picked up my grandmother's clock. Part 2. The finance degree. Let me tell you about the woman Thomas married. I have a degree in finance from Georgetown. Graduated 3rd in my class. I spent 2 years at a consulting firm in DC before I met Thomas at a conference. He was presenting on reconstructive surgery. I was there doing due diligence on a medical technology acquisition. He was brilliant and certain and laughed at my jokes in a way that made me feel, for the first time in my life, that my intelligence was an asset rather than an inconvenience to the men around me. We married 18 months later. I left the firm because Thomas's schedule was brutal and someone had to manage the architecture of a life, and because he asked me to, and I loved him, and I was 31 and I believed that love was sufficient evidence for most decisions. That was my first error. Not loving him, stopping everything else in order to. Thomas became one of the most respected reconstructive surgeons in the state. 7-figure income, hospital board positions, his name on a research foundation. He had the particular social fluency of men who have been told since boyhood that their talent exempts them from ordinary accountability. Warm in public, controlled at home, and surrounded by people whose careers depended on his good opinion. I managed our household, our investments, our social calendar, and, without either of us ever naming it, his image. I was good at it. I am good at most things I apply myself to. Thomas knew this and found it useful, which is a different thing from finding it admirable. I found the text 4 years ago. "Can't wait to feel your hands on me again." It came in at 11:23 p.m. on a Wednesday while Thomas was in the shower. His phone was on the kitchen counter. The name in the contact was a set of initials I didn't recognize. I set the phone back down exactly as I'd found it. I stood at the kitchen sink for a while. Then I called Sophia Marchetti. Sophia is a family law attorney with 22 years of practice, a reputation in 3 states, and the particular quality of stillness that very good attorneys develop, the kind that makes you feel, when you sit across from her, that the room itself has taken your side. Her assistant put me through at 7 a.m. the next morning. By 8:15, I was sitting in her office with a cup of coffee I wasn't drinking, telling her what I'd found. "Has he given you any indication this has happened before?" she asked. I thought about it. "He called me paranoid once," I said, "when I asked about a hotel charge." "How long ago?" 2 years. Sophia made a note. "All right," she said. "Here's what we're going to do." That was the last mistake Thomas ever knew about. Part 3. The architecture of leaving. I want to be clear about something. I did not make any of the decisions that followed in anger. Anger is a fire, and fires are useful for clearing ground but destructive if you need to build something on it. What I felt, in those first days after the text message, was something colder and more precise, a kind of crystallization, the way water becomes ice, same substance, entirely different structural properties. I became very still, very methodical, very patient. While Thomas monitored my grocery receipts, he had always done this, framed as household budgeting, which I had always understood as control. I was photographing financial documents, his personal brokerage statements, transfer records, the incorporation paperwork for 3 LLCs whose existence he had never mentioned. While he managed our joint accounts with the particular confidence of a man who has never imagined being checked, I was working with Daniel Firth. Daniel is a forensic accountant, 15 years with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division before he went private. He is 63 years old, methodical in the way that institutions make people methodical, and he has the organizational habits of someone who has spent decades building cases that have to survive courtrooms. He charged $375 an hour and was worth considerably more than that. Together, over 18 months, we mapped it. An offshore account in the Cayman Islands, $4. $1 million. registered through a nominee structure that was clean enough to miss on a casual review and obvious enough to unravel if you knew what you were looking for. A property in Aspen, title held in Eleanor's name, purchased with funds that traced back through 2 shell transfers to Thomas's personal accounts. And the centerpiece, a Delaware LLC called Meridian Consulting Group, which had no website, no employees, and no discernible business purpose, but which had received $12 million in transfers from various sources over 4 years. $12 million. Thomas, if you asked him, had no significant assets beyond the house, our investment portfolio, and his retirement accounts. He had told me this. He had told his accountant this. He had, as I later discovered, told the hospital's financial disclosure committee this as well. My finance degree, as it turned out, was still very much intact. In the 3rd year of what I had privately come to think of as the project, I bought a house. Cash purchase, 30 minutes from ours, title held by an LLC Sophia had helped me structure. I furnished it over 8 months, slowly, carefully, moving things from our house 1 carload at a time. I told Thomas I was donating old furniture to a women's shelter. Good for appearances, he said, without looking up from his phone. I planted a garden, installed a SimpliSafe security system with cameras at all 4 exterior angles. I transferred my most important documents there in a waterproof box. I set up a separate bank account, built a reserve, and made the house into the life I intended to live when all of this was finished. Then I waited for Thomas to make the first move. He made it while I was in another state, holding my grandmother's hand. Part 4. 30 minutes. I have thought about the porch scene many times since. What Thomas expected, I think, was tears, or argument, or the particular frozen devastation of a woman who has had the floor removed without warning and hasn't found her footing yet. He expected to be in control of the narrative, which he had always been, because I had always, until 4 years ago, allowed it. He did not expect me to bend down and pick up my grandmother's clock with steady hands. He did not expect me to check my phone and read Sophia's message. Joint accounts emptied 20 minutes ago. $347K transferred to his private account. Everything is triggered. And feel not panic, but something close to relief. The way you feel when the storm you've been watching build finally arrives. He did not expect me to walk calmly around the lawn, picking up my things, while he watched from the porch with Brooke in my robe and Eleanor behind them, both like a second shadow. I found my grandmother's copy of Middlemarch near the azalea bush. I had placed Thomas's divorce papers inside it 3 days earlier, before I left for the hospital. Sophia had couriered them to my grandmother's house when we knew the end was close, and I'd carried them home inside the novel because I didn't want them in my bag, where I might feel their weight every time I reached for my phone. I took the papers out, put them in my purse, put the book under my arm. I have everything I came for, I said. Thomas smiled, the particular smile of a man who believes he is watching someone lose. I turned back once at the Uber. You might want to check your hospital email, I said. The board sent something interesting this morning, something about a billing audit. The smile didn't disappear. It cracked, just slightly, just enough. I got in the car. Part 5. The machine starts. I moved into my house that night. The garden was further along than I'd expected. The tomatoes had climbed their cages while I was away, and there were marigolds along the south border that had opened gold and orange in the September light. I stood at the kitchen window for a while looking at them. I hadn't eaten since a gas station sandwich somewhere around New Haven. I made scrambled eggs and ate them standing at the counter with the security system panel glowing green in the corner. Sophia filed the emergency motions the next morning. The motions cited the $347,000 transfer, which Thomas had executed the moment he changed the locks, believing he was acting from a position of total control, as evidence of dissipation of marital assets. Judge Patricia Holbrook, 12 years on the family court bench, signed the freeze order by 11 a.m. Every account Thomas had disclosed, and several he hadn't, was frozen pending discovery. Daniel Firth's full forensic report was filed as Exhibit C, $12 million in hidden assets, the Aspen property in Eleanor's name, the Cayman accounts, Meridian Consulting Group with its 4 years of unexplained transfers and its complete absence of any legitimate business activity. Thomas hired 3 attorneys in 4 days. The first 2 withdrew. The third, a man named Richard Paulson, who specializes in high-asset divorce defense and charges $850 an hour, sent Sophia a letter suggesting that my forensic documentation had been obtained illegally. Sophia replied with a 4-page brief explaining in considerable detail why it hadn't. Thomas hired a private investigator to find me. The PI checked hotels, checked my college friends, checked, according to someone who told Sophia, homeless shelters. I was planting a second row of garlic and listening to a podcast about Roman history. Part 6. Brooke. She came to the restaurant on a Wednesday. I had not expected this. I want to be honest about that. I had built a thorough and detailed understanding of Thomas, of his finances, of his professional conduct, of the legal architecture of our marriage. I had not built an understanding of Brooke, because Brooke had seemed, from the available evidence, to be a consequence rather than a participant. I was wrong about that. She was already seated when I arrived. Late 30s, dark-haired, wearing a blazer over a gray t-shirt, and the particular expression of someone who has decided to do something difficult and is committed to it. She had a glass of water in front of her and both hands on the table. She pushed up her sleeve before I'd even sat down. 4 finger-shaped bruises on her inner forearm, yellow-green at the edges, a week old, maybe slightly more. I sat down. She slid a phone across the table without speaking, a Samsung Galaxy. The screen screen already unlocked. The passcode, she told me later, was my birthday. Thomas had set it up that way. She had never understood why until recently. It's a second phone, she said. He kept it at my apartment. I found it in a coat pocket 3 weeks ago. I looked at what was on the screen. I am not a person who goes pale easily, but I was aware, sitting in that restaurant, of something happening to the temperature of the room. Prescription records, not Thomas's, his patients. 14 files pulled from the hospital's record system without authorization. Names, diagnoses, medication histories, insurance information. Some of the prescriptions had been altered, dosages changed, refills added, in a pattern that Daniel Firth would later describe to the DA's office as consistent with a systematic diversion scheme generating approximately $60,000 to $80,000 per quarter. Thomas had been stealing from his patients and billing their insurance companies for procedures and medications that had either never occurred or had been materially misrepresented. He had been doing it, based on the file timestamps, for at least 3 years. I set the phone down on the table. He told me you were mentally unstable, Brooke said, that the marriage had been over for years, that you refused to leave. She paused. He said a lot of things. I know, I said. I didn't know about the money, she said. The hidden accounts. I didn't know any of that. I want you to understand that. I looked at the bruises on her arm. Did you document them? She pulled out her own phone. 17 photographs, time-stamped, sent to her personal email account. She had done it herself at 2 a.m. the night it happened, because something in her knew she would need them. She was smarter than Thomas had accounted for. We both were. I called Sophia from the parking lot. Then I called Detective Carl Okafor. Detective Okafor is a 14-year veteran of the Financial Crimes Unit, recently seconded to a joint task force with the State Medical Fraud Division. He had a voice like a man who has heard most things and is no longer surprised by them, and he listened to me for 11 minutes without interrupting. Can she bring the phone in? He said. Tomorrow morning, I said. Tell her not to touch anything else on it, he said. Chain of custody starts now. Part 7. The Unraveling. The hospital suspended Thomas's surgical privileges within 6 days of Detective Okafor's first interview with the billing department. I know the exact sequence because Sophia kept a timeline, and because the hospital's general counsel, a woman named Margaret Yee, 20 years in healthcare law, called Sophia twice during the process to confirm the scope of Thomas's documentation in our divorce proceedings. They wanted to know what we had. We shared what we legally could. What they found on their own was sufficient. The medical board began its formal investigation on the same day the hospital suspended him. Dr. Thomas Aldrich, reconstructive surgeon, Research Foundation board member, man of impeccable reputation, was placed on administrative leave pending a licensing review. The DA's office opened a criminal investigation the following week. I was not present for any of this. I was 30 minutes away, in a house Thomas didn't know existed, tending a garden and sleeping, for the first time in 4 years, without one ear always alert. Thomas, meanwhile, was unraveling in the particular way that men do when the systems that have protected them stop working. He called my cell phone 47 times in 1 week. I did not answer. He sent 11 emails. Sophia had them documented and filed. He contacted 3 of my friends asking for my location. 2 of them called me immediately, and one of them I will not be speaking to again. He hired a second PI. At 3:17 a.m. on a Thursday, the Simply Safe cameras at my house recorded Thomas in the driveway. He was carrying what the police report later described as burglary tools: a tension wrench, a flathead, and a pry bar wrapped in a cloth. He had parked his car 2 blocks away. He approached the side door. The alarm triggered silently at 3:18. The responding officers arrived at 3:24. Thomas was still at the door. He was arrested on the driveway in the beam of a flashlight, in the sort of image that manages, without any editorial assistance, to say everything there is to say about a man. The bail that had been set in his existing criminal case, the fraud charges, was revoked. Channel 7 had a crew outside the courthouse by 8 a.m. Prominent surgeon detained attempting to break into ex-wife's home. The anchor used the phrase "stunning fall from grace" twice in 90 seconds, which is the kind of efficiency I can at least appreciate professionally. Eleanor gave a composed statement to reporters outside Thomas's house that afternoon. 2 days later, she was admitted to Mercy General for what her doctor described as an acute anxiety episode. I did not send flowers. I thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. Part 8. The courtroom. The plea hearing was on a Tuesday in November. I wore gray. I sat in the 3rd row, not the front, close enough to see his face, far enough to feel like a witness rather than a participant. Sophia sat beside me. Daniel Firth was in the row behind us. Brooke, who had cooperated fully with the DA's office and whose testimony had been, by all accounts, thorough and precise, sat across the aisle. We did not look at each other. We didn't need to. Thomas walked in wearing a prison jumpsuit. He had lost weight. The certainty that had always structured his posture, the particular erectness of a man who has never doubted his place in a room, was gone. He looked like a man who had been disassembled and put back together by someone who didn't have all the pieces. 12 counts. The judge read them in a voice that had the flat procedural quality of someone describing weather: prescription fraud, insurance fraud, identity theft, unauthorized access to medical records, drug diversion, unlawful transfer of marital assets, criminal mischief, the broken clock, which Daniel's team had documented as part of the property inventory, 8 years minimum, medical license permanently revoked, the Aspen property in Eleanor's name, subject to asset recovery proceedings, Meridian Consulting Group dissolved, assets frozen pending pending civil forfeiture. He stopped beside me on the way out. The officer with him paused, allowed it. Thomas looked at me for a moment with an expression I had not seen on his face before. Not remorse, exactly, but something adjacent to it. The look of a man confronting the specific shape of his own miscalculation. "I never thought you were capable of this," he said. I looked at the man who had thrown my grandmother's clock on the lawn, who had stood on my porch in the afternoon light and checked his watch, who had spent 4 years believing that monitoring my grocery receipts was the same thing as knowing me. "That," I said, "was always your mistake." The officer touched his arm. He was led through the side door. I picked up my bag, and my phone buzzed. Unknown number. 4 words. "There's something about Thomas you still don't know. Meet me before you leave the building." Epilogue. The garden. I stood in the courthouse hallway for a moment. Sophia was beside me, reading the message over my shoulder. She said nothing, which is one of the many things I value about her. I texted back, "Who is this?" The response came in 30 seconds. "My name is Carol Whitman. I was Thomas's first wife. He told you I didn't exist. I have proof of something that affects the research foundation. Meet me in the lobby. I'm wearing a blue coat." I looked at Sophia. "Did you know?" I said. "No," she said, "but I'm not surprised." We found her near the main doors. Early 60s, silver-haired, in a blue wool coat with a leather briefcase under her arm. She had the careful, measured quality of someone who has been through a legal process before and emerged more organized for it. She extended her hand. "I've been following this case," she said. "I wanted to come forward sooner, but my attorney advised me to wait for the plea. The research foundation Thomas sat on, has been misappropriating grant funds for 2 years. I have documentation. I tried to report it 18 months ago and was told I had no standing." She opened her briefcase. "I think I have standing now." I looked at the documents she handed me. Then I handed them to Sophia. Then I thanked Carol Whitman, whose name Thomas had apparently erased from his own history as cleanly and completely as he'd tried to erase mine, and whose existence he had never once mentioned in 15 years of marriage. "How long were you married?" I asked. 4 years, she said. "He told me I was paranoid too." We stood in the courthouse lobby while the light came through the tall windows and the building went on around us with its ordinary business of consequences and records and the slow machinery of accountability. Then I went home. The garlic had come up while I wasn't watching. 2 neat rows of green shoots along the south border, pushing up through the November soil with the unreasonable optimism that growing things always seem to have. I crouched down and checked the depth. Good, strong. I have learned to grow things in poor conditions. Thomas is in a minimum security facility in the northern part of the state. His attorneys are still working through the asset recovery proceedings. The research foundation is under federal investigation. Eleanor has moved to Scottsdale to live with her sister and has, as far as I know, not spoken to the press again. Brooke got a restraining order and a civil settlement. She moved to Portland and, the last I heard, is working as a hospital administrator. She sent me a card at Christmas, a simple one, just her name and 3 words underneath. "Thank you, truly." I kept it on my kitchen windowsill all winter, next to my grandmother's clock, which a watchmaker in town repaired for $140. The face is still slightly cracked along the lower left corner where it hit the ground. I left it that way. I thought about repairing it completely. But there's something about visible damage on a thing that keeps working that I find more honest than a perfect surface. My grandmother would have understood that. She kept a teapot with a repaired handle for 40 years. And when you asked her about it, she'd say, "It holds the same amount of tea either way. It holds the same amount of tea either way." I go out to the garden most mornings, early, before the light is fully up. I check what's growing, what needs water, what the overnight temperature did to the tender things. I am building a life Thomas had no part in designing. It is, by every measure I know how to apply, exactly what I intended.